Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be doing another one of the ALA's books from the 2023 banned books list. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemwy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative genius. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, it'll be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work, because one of the hardest parts about actually publishing is having your book discovered in the sea of garbage that has only gotten bigger because of the generative AI stuff and the 20 to 50K people. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they are available at any of your favorite places. 2 Good Books, including the local library, upon request. I expect to be heavily ripped. So there is that. With that said, let's get into this. Today's book is called Sold by Patricia McCormick. It was number 10 on the ALA's banned books list for 2023 with 53 challenges nationwide. The alleged challenges for this were claimed to be sexually explicit and rape. I'm somewhat surprised that White Savior isn't shown on the challenge list, because if you go and look at the Goodreads page, it shows up in most of the 1-star reviews that at least I looked at. Now, I didn't look at all of the 1-star reviews, but it comes up quite a bit. I have a couple of feelings about this book, which I'll say at the very end of it. But in case you're new to this channel and this series, what I have started doing since last year was taking the ALA's banned books list due to all of the calls for banning and all of the fights for and against banning books. And by banning books, I just mean removing them from school libraries. And we got some people saying that it's an overreach and none of these books have anything bad about them. And the other side is saying, hey, this is a bunch of bigotry and all of the books are totally fine and there's nothing objectionable in any of them. And because people tend to get over emotional around the terms banned books and book burning, there seems to be a lot of not critically thinking or researching any of these topics. So I started reading these books to share them with you guys so that we can have discussions about the contents of the books, what we think of the books, and if we think that it is appropriate or not appropriate for the venue. This isn't a bigger scope issue, but it is an individual place for us to actually discuss the topics of the books, the way that the book is written, and appropriateness. Now, there are 2 things about the ALA's list that specifically irritate me in doing this. Number one is that it does not give geographical locations for where the requests for challenges comes from. So if most of these 53 challenges, let's say there were 40 of them, came from the same county, we're not going to know that this book is just being contested in a single county or, 3 counties. It's going to say nationwide, which again, 53 challenges is not much for 100,000 schools nationwide. The other thing is that it doesn't tell you what age group it was being removed from, nor if it was in the curriculum or in the library. So that makes it very difficult to tell the context of the book. And for me, I think that's dishonest on the ALA's part. Now, I don't know if that was an oversight or if that information was removed on purpose, but it does make it more difficult to know the context of the book's removal. And I do know because 50 Shades of Grey was in the ALA's banned books list a couple of years ago, and because Flamer, a comic book that was listed on last year's list, was found in K through 6th grade, while it featured the word fuck and a bunch of sexual references that if it had been turned into a movie, it would have been rated R, but somehow it was around 8-year-olds in a couple school districts. So there are shenanigans at play, and even the ALA list is kind of shenaniganery, but that's the preface to this. So we're going to go into the synopsis, and I will share some of my extra thoughts at the end, more than I already have or will within the synopsis. With that said, let's jump into the story. Lakshmi, the POV character, is outside with her mother looking over the village as she works. She quickly explains that her family is poor. Quote, "The tin roof means that a family has a father who doesn't gamble away the Lord's money playing cards in the tea shop. A tin roof means that the family has a son working in the brick kiln in the city. A tin roof means that when it rains, the fire stays lit and the baby stays healthy." Like, we're going to learn there are a lot of people in our village that basically their baby dies during the winter. It happens a lot. They have an annual baby burial. Because of that, Lakshmi asks her mom if she can go to the city to work so that she can send wages home, but her mother says that she must stay in school no matter what her stepfather says. She says that her stepfather doesn't value her. This makes me wonder if the mother even knows how her husband feels about her daughter, and if her husband always mistreated the daughter, if it was done in secret until after they were married. It already makes me think of Out of the Darkness, which is going to be a comparison that I make a couple of times, and that was a book that was on last year's book list. I think it's on this year's list too, and you can find the review of that on this channel. But that was where the mother also married a man who had a bad situation, bad feelings over the daughter, but the marriage happened seemingly to escape a life of poverty and or to get a green card, because Naomi's mother was from Mexico. But her mother also just kind of put up with how her husband was a POS and then had two children with him. And that was after Naomi's father masturbated in front of her when she was in the tub when she was 4 years old. So like some of these situations, I'm like, are we gonna get a little more context onto how this is? I understand that this is probably just normalized crappy situation, but like you gotta lower the reader into it somehow. Anyway, people will obviously put up with a lot, but there does feel to be a contradiction when mom cares so much about her daughter like this, but would also marry a man that she's unaware of, treats, or doesn't care about her daughter. Or in this case, you could say probably because it's normal for the mother to remarry when she has a daughter, so she's maybe not ashamed on her living situation, but then that's not really introduced as to like where stepdad suddenly came from. So again, it kind of was lacking in some areas for building the realism of the situation. Clearly, the daughter also cares about and worries about her mother, who is not being taken care of by her husband. So that's why she wants to go to the cities to make money. This sets up a strong dynamic between the family and leaves you asking both why and how this came to be. Lakshmi says that when her stepdad looks at her, he sees cigarettes and rice and beer and new clothing. So he just sees somebody who can make money to buy him things in her instead of anything of value. Lakshmi and her mother do all of the hard work just to benefit him. Meanwhile, all Lakshmi sees is poverty when she looks at her life, her family, her stepfather. She also sees a gambling problem in her stepfather. Lakshmi is now thinking about her relationships with somebody else. It doesn't say who it is, it's just a vague we. It's establishing what they all did together. BT dubs, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this book is written in short vignettes that some of them try to be like punchier, sort of like a prose poetry, but it's not consistent in the way that it's written, and it doesn't really seem to have a rhyme or reason as to why it changes from being a long form into a single sentence, into like repetitiveness. You'll see when we get there. But so I'm pretty sure this chapter was written as the collective village girls talking about Lakshmi. But it's also bizarrely placed because she's not going to be going anywhere for at least 50 to 70 pages. Quote, "We rubbed the rough-edged notch in the school bench for good luck before the recitation. We threw mud at each other during the long afternoons, stooped over patties, and wept with laughter when one of Gita's mud pies hit her haughty older sister in the back of the head." So as you can see, that whole chapter was just establishing the relationship between Lakshmi and the others. Back to Lakshmi, she's taking care of her goat with Amma, which is her mother, and then heads off to school. She promises Amma that next week they will work on spelling together because Lakshmi's mother actually did not go to school, cannot read, and Lakshmi is trying to teach her mother how to read with the information that she's getting from school. In the next chapter / story, Amma is taking care of the fire, plaiting Lakshmi's hair for school. She expresses that her mother is in a complete servitude to her father. Quote, "At night, as she serves my stepfather his dinner, she kneels at his feet. Even when she is standing upright to scan the sky for rain clouds, my Amma's back is stooped." She also is very much appreciative, values, and semi-worships her mother for how hard she sees her working. She's compared to a goddess of the mountains. Quote, "The people who live in our mountains, a cluster of red mud huts clinging to the slopes, worship the goddess who lives there on the swallow-tailed peak. They pray to the goddess whose brow is fierce and noble, whose breast is broad and bountiful, whose snowy skirts spread wide above us. She is beautiful, mighty, magnificent. But my Amma, with her crow-black hair braided with bits of red rag and beads, her cinnamon skin, and her ears hung with the joyful noise of tingling gold, is to me more lovely. And her slender back, which bears our troubles and all of our hopes, is more beautiful still." She said that her stepdad has a bad arm from which he broke when he was a child, and it never really developed. So he's virtually useless and never has really worked out. And so he hangs out with the old men at the tea shop playing cards and talking about politics and gambling all day. Amma tells Lakshmi that they're lucky to have men in their lives. It's an honor, and she praises and respects and thanks him for taking care of them after Lakshmi's father died. With her stepdad always being useless, I'm almost wondering how stepdad took care of her, period. To the point that mom is like, but he takes care of us, because clearly he does not. Then Lakshmi expresses having heard her father and the men in town being sexist. Quote, I pretend not to hear him joining in laughter when the men at the tea shop joke about the difference between fathering a son and marrying off a daughter. A son will always be a son, they say, but a girl is like a goat, good as long as she gives you milk and butter, but not worth crying over when it's time to make a stew. At night, Lakshmi thinks about what the world is like further out there outside of her village. Now is the season where the women are burying the children who died of fever and everything else that they were too sick to carry people to the doctor. This is also the season where they abort their babies that they believe will die in the winter anyway, so they drink something. Quote, this is also the season when the women drink the blue-black juices of the marking nut tree to do away with the babies in their wombs, the ones who would be born only to be buried in the next season. This section sets up that it is a very hard life and culture, and the nonchalant narrative emphasizes just how normal this brutality is. Lakshmi says that her mother is 31 and that she is 13. She also says that she has a baby brother now, and if he survives for the season, then he will be given a notch and a name, implying that you only get a notch if you survive a certain amount of time past infant mortality rate because it's so high. She also says that before this baby, there were 4 other siblings who died between her newest brother and her birth. She explains how she names the cucumbers that she is growing, and then in the next vignette, Lakshmi is having her first period. Her mother says that it's time for her confinement, and she must go live in the shed for a week until she is purified, and no one can see her until then. Later, once her dad and the baby are asleep, the mother says that she will come out and talk to Lakshmi about whatever she needs to know. So then we switch to Amma coming out and basically laying everything out to Lakshmi, where she's saying it's your job to please your husband in every way. If she has a son, she must breastfeed until he is 4 years old. If she has a daughter, she must breastfeed only for a season and then try again to have a son because the son is more important than the daughter. Lakshmi asks why women must suffer, and the mother says this is our fate. Simply to endure is to triumph. She also is told that she must be dignified, act like a lady, wear a shawl, and bow her head to men. Also, to never be alone with a man. Lakshmi is spending her day out in the shed with the goat, thinking about her future, her mother, visiting an astrologer to fix up the marriage to fix up a date for her marriage that she's going to have with a boy named Krishna. Lakshmi observes how when she's watching Krishna, she's pretty sure that he's also watching her back, so it's a mutual attraction. Then there's a series of vignettes on how hard things are and how poor the town is and how much they need the rain, or else they all might have to sell their belongings. Lakshmi goes down to the village spring for no stated reason, and then she comes back and it looks like her stepdad's cot is empty. Also seems like since he's gone, he took the cucumbers with him, the ones that she were growing, and she figures out it was all so that he could stay out gambling all night and drinking and losing all of the money. Her mom comes out and gives her a jug, and the two of them go back down to the water to get water without acknowledging what happened. Then there is a scene where pots and pans are catching water inside of the house as it rains. Lakshmi and her mother go talking about getting materials for a roof, expanding their farm, getting Lakshmi a dress if they can make enough money, as her mother smokes a cigarette, and Lakshmi thinks about how her mom has a bit of a mischief streak, and that shows just in the way that she's smoking a cigarette. Now there's a monsoon that's coming, and it's wrecking everything. They can't defend against it enough. It's the worst monsoon that they've had in years. After everything is wrecked, all of their plans for that future harvest and making enough money to expand the farm, get a roof, get a dress, it's all gone because the farm is entirely wrecked. There's no harvest, and there's just nothing that they can do about it. And it was at this point that, again, I was already thinking of Out of Darkness, because it's like, look, we're going to build up all of this hope and then crush it. Oh, we're going to build up that things are nice and then crush it. And that's exactly the pace of Out of Darkness. Speaking of which, a parade of people wanting payment then shows up at the door of Lakshmi and her family. Things are worse off now because of the monsoon, and stepdad comes home with more debts to pay, and Lakshmi wonders how long until her stepdad never comes home, and Amma can't pay for anything else, so they all starve. Then a stranger comes up the hill to their house, and she's unsure of who this is. Maybe a government man that comes around every once in a while to give different villagers money if they're in the right place. She plans to help her mom read any contract that the man might bring, and the man does make her uneasy, but he eventually leaves. Later, they go to a festival of Lakshmi's namesake, and dad had mom's money pouch around his neck, as he says that today is the gambler's day. At the festival, Lakshmi runs into this woman wearing very nice clothing who offers to take her to the city so that she might be a maid, and then she can be her new auntie. Lakshmi considers going with her, but eventually runs off and doesn't tell her mother that this happened. Dad has a new motorcycle and wants to show it off at the tea house. Later, he comes back without it. Mom tries not to talk about it to shame her husband, and meanwhile, the next morning, Mama comes in to Lakshmi crying and tells her that she must go to the city to become a maid. The stepfather has arranged this. Lakshmi assures her that this will be a good thing because there will be fewer mouths to feed, and so then she can send money from the cities. Now, this part kind of confuses me in retrospect because I sort of assumed that her dad bought the motorcycle from selling her, but then they're discussing prices later in the story. So then, like, where did he get the money for the motorcycle? Unless he somehow won at gambling, which we didn't actually get to hear about in the story. So that's kind of skipped over. Lakshmi is then given the rules for working in the city by her mom: how to hide or stay behind the mistress, don't look at the men in the city, hide your money, say your prayers, and washing instructions for her clothing. Her stepfather gets dressed up to take her to a local store where she is sold to a woman in a yellow dress for 1,800 rupees. Lakshmi is both confused by all of the money, how she is even getting paid for work she hasn't done yet, or why this woman would be talking about how unhappy she is with her because of her hips being so small or her body being so small, when instead she should be happy because Lakshmi is like, I have the strength that will overpower boys. Like, I could do so much better than the boys. She's told by her father to obey the auntie or else her family will not get paid. Lakshmi is very confused about the money, but is excited enough that she grabs a Coke to celebrate, and because of the type of day it is and because of the deal that just happened, nobody stops her from taking that Coca-Cola. As she leaves town with her new auntie, she eyes Krishna and thinks about how when she returns, she'll have a dowry for their marriage. The auntie tells her to stay with looking down, and there is no point in looking back, and she obeys. There's a small collection of vignettes at this point with her traveling from Nepal to India that ends with, my bundle is light, my burden is heavy. Lakshmi is getting a little more uncomfortable with who Auntie seems to be, with everything continuing forward as they reach the first city. At first, she's overwhelmed by everything that's happening around her because she's never been in a big city before, but then after staring long enough, she says, quote, if I look hard enough, chaos turns into order the way that letters turn into words. She's assured that they haven't reached their final destination, so she shouldn't make herself comfortable, and Lakshmi is relieved since she was worried about the roofs here not being made of gold, and she was sure that anytime she went to a rich city, the roofs would be made of gold. They get to the house where Auntie gives Lakshmi a new outfit and shoes and demands that she change her clothes now. The clothes is like a little wrap that's very thin. Lakshmi is bashful about this as it's inappropriate for her, and she's never changed clothes in front of another person, but Auntie is like snapping at her and is like, you need to change right now, free and obey me. And so then she turns her back and she does. Auntie is then like, don't worry, dear, we'll get those small town manners right out of you. Then a man comes in who buys Lakshmi from the auntie for a lot of money, and he's taking her away, paid more than she would. She was paid even more by this man because she is 13 years old. This man tells her to call him husband uncle and then leads her out the way. Lakshmi and the husband uncle are then traveling, and he threatens her to not try running away, or else the family that she comes from will not get any of the money that they were promised. She goes to pee on the ground with a bunch of other women and is embarrassed of herself because nobody should have to pee like this, but she had to go really bad, and they're in the middle of traveling, and that was the only place to go to the bathroom. In India now, she's sold to yet another woman by her uncle husband, and then shown into a room with other girls and a toilet and a bucket for a toilet. Then she's left to fall asleep. She also wonders about the conditions of the other girls if they eat at all, because she thinks that they do, but they're really skinny. So she's not really sure what she's living in or what she's seeing or where exactly she is. Now we got to spend some time with the girls. One of them is watching TV, and Lakshmi is seeing a TV for the very first time. She's also getting increasingly uncomfortable with where she is because she's not entirely sure what she's supposed to be doing. It's dirty. It doesn't make her think that she's going to be a maid, but she doesn't really know what's going on. She is eventually led out of that room down the hall to where an old man is, where she is molested. Later, she tells the mistress that she is going to escape, leave, and go home. The mistress taunts her by saying that there is nowhere for her to go. She doesn't speak the language, and then cuts off all of her hair and says any girls who try to escape here when they don't have hair like this will be brought right back to me. So, like, if you want to challenge my abilities, then go ahead. But you're going to be here, and then you're going to regret it for disobeying me. Lakshmi then gets emotional, but she does not cry. Then we get a few vignettes of Lakshmi being beat by her madame because she is not cooperating. The madame asks if Lakshmi will cooperate yet. So the madame asks if Lakshmi is going to cooperate with her yet and do what she is supposed to do. And when Lakshmi says no, she gets beaten and she gets told that she will starve. Lakshmi says that she will outlast the madame because she knows how to be hungry from where she comes from. After some time, a girl comes into her room and tries to convince Lakshmi to behave and fails, to which she is then fed tea. And because the little girl is the same age as her, or, around the same age as her, is not the madame, and she is incredibly thirsty, Lakshmi drinks it up. Now this tea is probably drugged because immediately after this, the next thing you know, Lakshmi is being raped by an old man. And this is going to be the most graphic scene in the book. I do find it important to share it with you because none of the other text in this book is as graphic as this is, though it is set in a brothel, so you're going to have a rape and sexual content throughout the story. But because the claims against the book, based on what the ALA says, are the sexual explicitness, I think it's important I share this bit with you so that you can know just how, like, what the worst this book has to offer is, so then you can judge the book based on that when we get to the end of everything. Quote, I open my eyes to watch him squeeze my other breasts and wonder, who is this Habib he keeps talking about? If this really is your first time, he says, old Mumtaz is a tricky one. He unbuckled his belt. Once before, she sold Habib used goods. The fish lips man removes my dress. I wait for myself to protest, but nothing happens. Habib, he says. Habib is good with ladies. Then he is on top of me, and something hot and insistent is between my legs. He grunts and struggles, trying to fit himself inside of me. With a sudden thrust, I am torn in two. Oh yes, he says, panting. Habib is good in bed. I hear, coming from the distance, a steady thud, 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 and a register that this is the sound of the headboard hitting the wall. After a while, I don't know how long, another sound interrupts the rhythmic thud of the headboard. And so that's pretty much that. And then at the end of this vignette, she discovers that she is crying, and she didn't recognize when she started crying. Afterwards, Lakshmi is obviously traumatized, not really fully there, and not sure which people around her are real or figments of her imagination. Quote, in the endless twilight after the lassie and before the morning, others come. My stepfather appears, wearing his big-shouldered coat and city hat, puffing on a cigarette. Then Beja Sita is sitting there at the foot of the bed, locked in gossip with the headman's wife. And sometimes Auntie Bimla comes, her eyes glinting like new coins. They seem real, but I know that they're not. In between, men come. They crush my bones with their weight. They split me open. Then they disappear. I cannot tell which of the things they do to me are real and which are nightmares. I decide to think that it is all nightmares because if what is happening is real, it is unbearable. Then we go into the next vignette called Hurt. Quote, I hurt. I am torn and bleeding where the men have been. I pray to the gods to make the hurt go away, to make the burning and the aching and the bleeding stop. Music and laughter come in from the room next door. Horns and shouting come from the street below. No one can hear me. Not even the gods. From this section, which just feels like a bunch of trauma dumping, and I'm not trying to sound disrespectful, but I don't think that this book was written very well. It didn't build into the story, and instead it spends too much time wallowing over the same thing after it's already made its point to be like, do you see that it sucks? Do you see how bad it is? Do you feel bad yet? Do you feel bad yet? What about now? Do you feel bad yet? That's what it feels like it's doing constantly. And so instead of it feeling like an intimate story of a very sensitive subject, it kind of comes off more like exploitation materials. This story was ripe to be something deep and it could have been really strong, but it grabs choice words to wallow and create misery porn rather than an authentic story of a child being trafficked. And sometimes it does feel like it's trying to be the story of a trafficked child, and other times it goes in the complete wrong direction where it leans too much in do you feel bad yet land. Another example, quote, what you hear. Before it starts, you hear a zipper baring its teeth, perhaps the sound of a shoe being kicked aside in haste, the wincing of the mattress. Once it starts, you may hear the sound of horns bleeding in the street below, the peanut vendor hawking his treats, or the pock of a rubber ball as the children shout and play in the schoolyard nearby. But if you're lucky, or if you work hard at it, you hear nothing. Nothing, perhaps, but the clicking of the fan overhead, the steady ticking away of the seconds until it's over, until it starts again. Now, I get what it's trying to do with doing these stories, and maybe it was because, like, I was reading it, so it was just repetitive as opposed to summarizing it. But again, there was so much of saying the same thing again and again. Oh, more men. Oh, more men. Nothing is happening. Oh, more men. I think this could do so much better than what it was when we're talking about sensory information and visceral words. In order to create stark images and balances between her trying to hold on to hope where she is, seeing where she is, what's happening, trying to cope with what's happening, especially if you let her leave the place and then come back or go into the rooms, or her just so many different things to intermix instead of just again and again and again and again and again reminding us that she's raped and hurting for a couple of vignettes. I mean, that's my response. This book is highly rated, but I don't think that it was emotionally strong, but maybe I'm just emotionally dead on the inside. And so all I see is the author's hand trying to make me feel bad rather than allowing me to live through the character's circumstances. The other girls eventually comes in and gives Lakshmi a condom, telling her that she should insist that the men use it and don't take no for an answer. And also don't tell Madame that you have condoms because she will get mad and then she will beat you. Then we get, quote, a bucket of water. There's a bucket of water next to my bed. No matter how often I wash and scrub, I cannot seem to rinse the men from my body. Time is passing, and she is thinking of home, and then trying to hold on to those memories. Then the madame comes into the room and tells Lakshmi that she's worth less now because she's not a virgin. I'm wondering if that premium rate was, like, kept with a couple of these guys. Is that a weird question? How long was she sold as a virgin for between these chapters? But anyway, so she's told that she can go downstairs with the other girls and appear for sale every night alongside them. She can leave when she pays off her debt. That's currently bigger than it started when she first got there because, you know, there's the cost of housing and there's the interest rate, and pretty much it's just a death trap to use these girls until they ultimately die or become worthless. She joins the girls downstairs, eats, and is told to watch TV with them. Lakshmi doesn't understand how the other girls can so casually watch TV and laugh while knowing what is waiting for them in just a couple of hours. She also meets other girls that she'll be sharing the rooms with, one of which is the mother of two who came here after her husband died. Then the girls are telling Lakshmi the rules about this place. You must make sure that the men choose you to pay off your debt, do what they say and so you get paid. Don't let Madame know that you're grabbing condoms when the government lady comes around. Don't be fooled by the Americans who try to trick you into running away. Tell people that you are younger than you are. Say you're 12 or something because the men will pick you and like you better if they think that you are younger. And then the old men that you seduce will give you candy if they like what you've done. Then Lakshmi hears of this new girl being moved up into the room that she recently vacated, but then the next thing she hears about that girl is that she was found hanged in the room, having committed suicide. She hears about how the kids at the brothel are managed. So most of them go to school during the day, and then when they come back, when it's time for the Johns to come in, the older kids go and hang out and play on the roof, while the younger kids are given drugs so that they pass out and then are tucked under the beds so that the moms can have sex with the Johns on the beds and the youngsters are underneath the beds. That's definitely not going to cause some unrelated trauma. One girl gives a lowdown on the costs of everything based on the madame's way of doing things and how it just buries the girls in more costs no matter what they do. So pretty much there's no escape. She mentions a girl named Monica who is in the brothel and acts sexy instead of childish. And that girl says that her debts are almost paid off entirely. There's a bit of tension when Lakshmi refuses the offer to learn how to act sexy because, what, you think that you're better than me? Lakshmi also has growing resentment for one of the young boys who is a son of one of the women at this brothel. This boy is called the David Beckham boy since he wears David Beckham's jersey and really likes soccer. Lakshmi is jealous of him because he can come and go as he pleases and he can play soccer and he can have a future, unlike her, who is probably not going to have a future. She can't come and go as she pleases, and she can't have the normal life that he has. He gets to go to school. She doesn't get to go to school. She also admits to stealing his comic books from him when no one is looking because it makes her feel normal to have a comic book in her hands. Then we get to hear about how the Madame's thugs beat up people if they run away and beat you if you have a disease before they kick you out. They beat up one of the girls named Anita, and now half of her face is dead and it looks like she might be kicked out of the brothel. Then Lakshmi learns about the corrupt policemen who get paid off by the Madame to look the other way. The David Beckham kid that she's jealous of catches her playing make-believe and pities her. Lakshmi watches for that boy as he comes home every day because she wants to know when she needs to put his comic books back because she's still stealing his comic books when he's not looking. This is also when Lakshmi sees the other boys that David Beckham kid goes to school with mocking David Beckham kid because his mom is a whore and they're just harassing him as he walks home. The kid then offers to teach Lakshmi how to read. This boy also watches his mom for a fever because if she gets sick, they'll be out on the streets. So now Lakshmi is learning Hindi thanks to David Beckham boy. They talk about some of the other girls who are around, with Monica leaving soon. Lakshmi asks why she doesn't just leave, and some girl explains how Monica will be punished if she just dips and doesn't finish paying off her debt. Because Monica has a kid, because the Madame is obviously not opposed to robbing the cradle. Quote, "What would Amantas want with a child? She will maim it, cut off its hand, a foot, and sell it to a beggar woman. Soft-hearted people will give an extra rupee or two if they have a sick baby. And so I considered a world so ugly where a child would be maimed for life to fetch an extra rupee or two, and another world full of brides and marigolds and rain machines and white horses." Someone else warns Lakshmi not to let the Madame know that she can read and write, or else the Madame will think that she's planning to escape. Then eventually she's learning English from David Beckham boy, and the person is telling her that Americans will not shame her for being in a brothel. They just want to help. She learns a couple of things about America from this kid because he's going to a school that I think is run by Americans because he ends up getting connections with Americans. So it's like some kind of missionary thing or like foreign aid kind of thing where it's a school set up by Americans to help teach these kids, I think it is. It doesn't really explain it. It just kind of, somehow he knows Americans, and that's where he's learning his English from. So he tells her about America, and she thinks that it is a strange, magical looking place. Then Lakshmi gets a nicer customer that she calls the hugging man because he stays behind once they're done with things and talks to her. She likes him a lot because he treats her very differently than our other normal customers, and so then she counts down the days to when he's going to visit her again. Over time, eventually she determines that he's probably not coming back, and she stops counting the days since his visit because it's just making her depressed. Over time, Lakshmi notices how Monica is somewhat protective of the other girls. Even when she sometimes seems closed off or short-tempered or aggressive or defensive, she reacts to things like sad music. So Lakshmi sits down with Monica, because Monica's been defending all of the girls, and they watch TV together. She learns the rumors about Monica having a daughter is true, and it looks like the two are becoming friendly with one another. While she's at this brothel, she started to receive a couple of gifts between people, and they make her go soft because she's not used to receiving them. Then she makes a gift soccer ball out of her torn up shawl that she brought with her to give it to David Beckham kid in the shape of a soccer ball. Monica leaves at this point, and the hugging man has still not come back yet, though it has been a month. The David Beckham kid then works with Lakshmi to teach her more English that he's been learning from the American lady at school. Lakshmi now has a fever and is a bit delusional, dreaming of super nice things, including some of the imagery that she got about America. When she comes to, the nurse that is helping her makes her feel gratitude because it's the first time in a long time that anybody has ever cared about her. However, pretty much in the face of normal medical care, you get slapped in the face with a bill at the end where she's like, Well, I guess this wasn't out of kindness, was it? The nurse says all of those costs for those pills that you took that lowered your fever are going to be added to the amount that you owe the madame. So good luck escaping. Monica then returns to the brothel covered in bruises. She says that she was beat by her village for becoming such a disgrace and chased out of town. She also tells Lakshmi that she never got to see her daughter because the town, so ashamed of her, had actually told her daughter that she died. So, yeah, this is all that she has. The madame tries to get one of the other girls to sell her young child, so when she is of age, she can be sold to a man for a lot of money that'll pay off her debt. The woman refuses to sell the child and breaks down crying. David Beckham Boy's mom is now sick and he's very sad. He's going to talk to the American woman about a job that she mentioned, breaking rocks on the side of the road for 50 rupees a day, to see if he can get money to help his mother out. One day, though, shortly after this, a strange American customer comes in and starts asking her questions like if she's here against her will, what's her name, how old is she, would she like to leave? But Lakshmi doesn't really trust this guy because all of her life here, she's been told not to trust the Americans and that they lie to you and that you don't run off with them. But despite not saying anything, he gives her his card, which she puts in her waistcloth. She tells someone about the American and then worries that she'll be reported to the madame for having talked to him at all. She looks for Monica and can't find her. Then she hears that Monica has a virus and has been kicked out. Pretty much it sounds like Monica has gotten AIDS and there is no remedy for it, so she's not welcome in the brothel anymore. Then one day, as all is normal, there is a raid. It's the Madame's henchies, or the goons that she's mentioned before, and it looks like they've come in and run off with Shayna, one of the other girls, after destroying a couple of things. One of the other brothel girls says that maybe this was actually the police who did this because they tend to take a girl when the madame falls behind on her payments. Lakshmi asks the madame about the missing girl and then gets beat up. So this kind of bothers me because there are a lot of scenes in this book that kind of come out of nowhere when you could be building the tension towards something, like the madame working up, hey, you guys need to get on this, hey, you guys need to get on this. And it could have used one or two vignettes to just build the tension that something was going to happen and then lead into the raid. And instead, the raid just kind of happened where it felt like, oh, the author needed to do something, and it was not built into the life of this person who is existing in this condition. Again, another thing where there's just no build, it's just random. Now they're having to cover the missing girl's customers so that they don't get unhappy. Lakshmi is unmotivated to do any of the work, so she just lays in bed reading her comic book while the madame sends men up to her room. She doesn't participate in the exchange. She just lays there unmoving while stuff happens and she waits for it to be over. And because of this, the madame says that if you don't start doing your job, I'll sell you to another brothel. A different American comes into the brothel, and Lakshmi thinks that he might be related to the other American who came in and gave her the card. She's wrong, and he rapes her. Then we get the madame telling Lakshmi that she's not getting out. She has at least 5 more years here before she can pay off her debt, which turns into, quote, any man, every man. Here at the happy house, there are dirty men, old men, rough men, fat men, drunken men, sick men. I will be with them all. Any man, every man. I will become Monica. I will do whatever it takes to get out of here. And then we get whatever it takes. I have a regular customer now. He makes me do nasty things, but he then gives me 10 extra rupees. I had a drunken customer yesterday. When he fell asleep afterward, I went through his wallet and helped myself to 20 rupees more. A Tafur man came to the door yesterday, and I told him that I would be with him for 50 extra rupees. I can actually appreciate at least somewhat that this uses more vague expressions when talking about certain things, because I think that makes this more appropriate for younger audiences to talk about the issue without like being super direct on some things. But then I also think that it doesn't get direct on some things that it should get direct on in order to give it more meaning. But it also has a pacing problem for me because it doesn't actually build any of this story. It's kind of just living and living and living and living and thing happen and living and living and living and living. And it could have done better to like structure her life so that you could see a day to day. There are some threats that go on between the girls, one of them telling Lakshmi to stay away from her wealthy clients, but she says no because she's going to get the frick out of here and you can't tell her what to do. The other girl, who is closest to the madame, the spy girl, calls Lakshmi stupid for believing that the madame would ever say that she can ever leave. Lakshmi then laments about how she hears these new girls that have been brought in crying in her old room and how she doesn't really care about that anymore. They sound pretty much as annoying as the horns outside because she's been so emotionally deadened by this situation. Lakshmi then considers Spy Girl's words about how she may never be able to get out, and she thinks like that must be true, right? Because Spy Girl knows the Madame better than anybody else. So why would the Spy Girl lie about that? Then there is a boy who comes in who sells soda. Again, something that could have been brought on early on, especially when she was brought out of the room for the first time and introduced to the other girls. And she could have established this relationship with Soda Guy. So then when we get this chapter or this short story, it actually means more for what's about to happen. So the boy comes in and he gives some of his Coke to Lakshmi for free because he kind of likes her. And he's like, you know what? It's okay. I can spare a Coke or two sometimes. The next day that he comes in, he's kind of beat up because he didn't collect the money on all of the products. This causes Lakshmi to go and ask for money from the accountant so that she could pay Kolaboy for what she owes. And that's when the accountant tells her that her family has never seen a cent of what's been made here. It's all just going into Madame's pocket. She thinks that if Spy Girl is right, then all of the abuse that she's gone through has been for nothing because none of the money went to her family, and she will be thrown out on her butt if she gets sick, and then her family won't be better off for anything because nothing that she's doing means anything. Cola Boy then comes around the next day or a later point day because it's going to be his last day on this route since he failed to collect. He's being replaced with somebody else. Lakshmi hugs him and the girls call her stupid like she's fallen in love with him. Again, if this was established earlier on as a point of something every day that she looked forward to or every other day, or that she watched out the window for him so that she could talk to him because it was something small and he gave her a little feeling of normal, this would have been much more emotionally impactful, because she would have built that relationship both with Lakshmi and the character to have an impact. Instead, it's like, here's a new random sad thing for one vignette, so about a page. After he's gone, he's replaced with a new Cola Boy that Lakshmi doesn't like as much because he's just cold and not the same kind of person. Another American arrives and she is quickly pulled upstairs by him. He seems to be like the first one, and he shakes her hand, asking her a lot of the same questions that she was asked by the first American. He takes her picture and then shows it to her. This is the first time that she's ever seen a camera and even a picture of herself. This man asks her if she wants to leave and then shows her a picture of the girls that they've rescued previously with his troop in a different camp, which is a camp for abused girls taken from these situations. He's telling her that he can help her get to safety, and then this man promises to help her escape, that he will come back, so just prepare yourself. So she does just that by taking all of the belongings, the very few that she has, and preparing herself to leave for when he comes back. She then counts down the days for how long he's gone, waiting for him to return. As she tries to hold on to hope, though, she's losing it as the man doesn't really come back. And she says that the hope that she had to run away actually made her forget how to ignore the job that she has and what it feels like when the men are on top of her. Then comes the panic as the cook is preparing some hot chilies because the Madame has been betrayed. She knows she has. And with betrayal comes chilies shoved inside of your vagina. Lakshmi is sure that it's coming for her. Madame is not coming for her, though. There was some other girl that ended up getting bangles from some random customer, and then the Madame is like, excuse me, what? That is not, you're not allowed to do that. The Madame says that Lakshmi is acting guilty and then asks her, what, should you be punished? Why don't you tell me what you did, huh? And Lakshmi is like, I did not do anything. I am sorry that I even looked guilty. So then the Madame tells Lakshmi to be on her way. Now, a couple of things about this I'm specifically curious about. Number one, why didn't the Madame just try to sell this girl to the guy that gave her the bangles like it was a requirement? Number two, because she doesn't have to do that, isn't it like a bad thing to shove chilies in the vagina of a prostitute? Because isn't that going to affect her ability to work? So in the long run, I know that it's a punishment, but in the long run, does this affect it, like her profitability? Because I don't understand, and maybe this is my own naivety, and I understand that much, so feel free to dunk on me for being naive, but like, would that not deter some customers, or like make it not as good for some customers? Because like, who's gonna want to stick their dick in chilies? I just don't understand this punishment when you're still trying to use that person for an income. Anyway, after that, So next, it's some random day, and the American man comes back and demands that the young girls be released to him, and the madame is arrested. Lakshmi tries to get one of the other girls who is upstairs with her to go to the American with her because they're just hearing this raid go on downstairs. And the other girl upstairs is like, no, no, it's a lie. I'm scared. I don't want to go, because all this time they've been told do not trust the Americans. So the girl locks herself in the room, and Lakshmi goes down the stairs to the American, and she comes flying through the doors, flying down the stairs. The madame is already being arrested. Her arms are like behind her back, and Lakshmi says her name, where she's from, that she's 14 years old, and that's where the book abruptly ends. Like, that's it. So yeah, there's no build at all. It just kind of happens. So let me know what you think about just all of that. I'm only reading the synopsis now, and I feel unfulfilled a second time. Right after it ends with, and I'm 14 years old, though, it goes into this author's note. Quote, each year, nearly 12,000 Nepali girls are sold by their families, intentionally or unwittingly, into a life of sexual slavery in the brothels in India. Worldwide, the U.S. State Department estimates that nearly 500,000 children are trafficked into the sex trade annually. As part of my research for Sold, I traced the path that many Nepalese girls have taken from remote villages to the red light districts of Calcutta. I also interviewed aid workers who rescued girls from brothels, provided them with medical care and job training, and who work to reintegrate them into society. But most touching and inspiring was interviewing survivors themselves. These young women have experienced what many people would describe as unspeakable horrors, but they are speaking out with great dignity. Some go door to door in the country's most isolated villages to explain what really happens to girls who leave home with strangers promising good jobs. Some of them, even women who are ill with HIV, patrol the borders between Nepal and India on the lookout for young girls traveling without their parents. And some are facing their traffickers in court, where it is often their word against the fathers and brothers, uncles and husbands who sold them for as little as $300. It is in their honor that this book was written. Honestly, that blurb, and I agree with some of the comments on Goodreads that I saw that says that blurb was more interesting than the way that the rest of this book was written. And considering that she says that she did interviews with all of these different kinds of people, I am actually really, really sad. I'm actually really disappointed that she didn't use those interviews and create a nonfiction that uses aid workers and victims and a travel log and explains the cultural history and the relationship between Nepal and India, because that would have been a much better book, I think, than this. And she's also a journalist, so I think that that would have been much more hard-hitting and been much more honest and felt much less exploitive than this. So this book is not very long. It's just over 200 pages, probably around 230-ish. I would say almost 50% of it is just setting up that she is from a poor country, but at the same time, you don't really get a whole lot of traditions about the country. You get stuff like, this is when we're burying the dead, but it doesn't do a lot to build the feelings and the emotions and the setting, at least not as much as I would have liked. And then it just is so repetitive in expressing the pain and the suffering and how poor and how little money that they have. And the monsoon goes on for a while. And if it's going to build that, I think it could have done that better. I don't really like the writing style of this, and I didn't think that it was super helpful because of the and the next and the next and the next. There was one section when she was traveling from Nepal with First Auntie. That was next. As our cart shoulder to shouldered its way along the road, I craned my neck this way, then that, looking at a man scooping hot popcorn into a paper cone, next to a barber lathering an old man's face, next to a boy plucking the feathers from his lifeless chicken, next to an ear cleaner, his customer grunting with satisfaction, next to a woman whose arms are draped with 100 necklaces, next to a man with a flute coaxing a snake out of a bucket, next to a tailor pumping his treadles with his sewing machine, next to a bone seller rattling his wares, next to a woman with a basket heaped with dates, next to a pig nosing through a pile of trash, next to a boy ladling oil out of a tin, next to a man selling broken pieces of a motorcycle, next to a girl threading marigolds on a string, next to a man with crates of pigeons for sale, next to a woman serving tea, next to a boy shining shoes, next to a water buffalo napping in the shade, next to a man selling cucumbers, next to a man chanting to prayer, next to a man scooping hot popcorn into a paper cone, and I wonder, in the swarming, hurry-up city, what will happen next to me? And then you have, following that, seeing a girl with long black braid. There are 1,000 girls in the city, but so far, none of them is Geeta. And that's the end of that section. And so the styling of this, I'm not super into the told in verse, but this didn't really feel like it had a reason behind why some vignettes were written one way and some were written another way. It kind of just felt like whatever it wanted to do. But if somebody is more educated on specifically the experimental side of writing in verse, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm just not the audience for that type of writing, and I'm just going to straight up say it. As a secondary, I love setting, and that's probably not a surprise. I said it earlier in this video, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I love setting. If you read any of my books, you know that I take setting and I try to turn it into a character of its own, where it's got its very own identity, and I take that very seriously. And I'm disappointed that this didn't really seem like it tried to do that with Nepal or India. I don't feel like it really embraced the places where this character was. And I feel like that was at a detriment to this story. I don't know if the author might have distanced herself from the location because she is a foreigner to Nepal and India. And so it might have felt like she was insulting their culture or stepping into something and describing something that she is not a part of. So it would have been insulting. Or if she depersonalized it in order to make a more everyman catch all for different ways that people can be trafficked into the same situation. So while it is set in Nepal and India, it's not specific to them. And so the characterization was drawn out of it in order to just make it a kind of generic third world country reference, or if there was a third or fourth reason for why this might have been done this way. But I don't think that it was effective to creating a unique story that would be as hard hitting, because I think that the setting and the character very much ground a story in where it is and make it feel more real. So if you skimp on the setting, it takes away from the realism of the story and the investment in the story. Since I talked about like not knowing how these books get on the ALA list, period, because it doesn't say where they're contested from, I don't feel like this book is a book that somebody would typically read for fun. I can see it as more commonly a book used in maybe a class. Like, I know that there was at least one review that I saw that said she was a world literature teacher and she was going to put this in the class, but I could also see it being in the library. I don't know, but I do see that this being the kind of book that would encourage discussion around sex slavery and trafficking in Nepal and India, especially because of the way that it repeated itself. It often felt more like the book lacked in knowing characterization or how to build a narrative or how to focus on the story and the character and have her go through her daily life and get us to believe in her daily life. So it just ended up repeating itself in its misery and saying that they're poor and miserable instead of showing her day to day. Like I said, with the relationships with the Cola kid, with the relationships with the David Beckham kid, it tried a little bit more with David Beckham kid, with the relationships of the different Johns that came in. Like, let it build a little bit more, let us see a little bit more of where she lives and how she lives and these other girls, and did she ever get to leave her place at all because then she could come back, or did she just live in that brothel, period, never being allowed to walk out the door? Because it didn't seem like the other girls were unable to leave. They just chose not to. The ending of this book felt too abrupt to be meaningful. It came out of nowhere, but again, that becomes a problem with the pacing where it never built anything. And then you just throw it out there, run down the stairs. I am 14 years old, and I think it would have been much more meaningful, especially to the goal of this book based on what the author has said, with it wanting to be about like encouraging people in school that they can take action and be part of the change. I think it would have been better to show her either getting back to her hometown, being either rejected by her hometown in the same way Monica was, being embraced by her hometown and her mother, who were glad to have her back, or finding a new home with the Americans, like something. But the way that it ended, I don't feel like was helpful at all, and it was such a weird spot to me. But let me know what you think about where it ended. I did want to bring up, because I saw it in the comments, I did want to since I saw it in the reviews, I did want to bring up the idea of white savior. Because I saw it in some of the book reviews, I did want to bring it up for a topic of discussion here, where the Americans are coming into this foreign country and then are the ultimate solution in the end of this story. The main character didn't really have to do anything. She was just rescued by a couple of white Americans. And so commonly when this kind of thing comes up, people critique it for being white saviorism. And do you think that there is ever a time in which it is appropriate or allowed to have white characters or Americans like this come in to rescue? Because it does happen in history in the same way it can and does happen. And just as much just as commonly as I know that Americans are not always the good guys in other countries as well. I get that. But I don't think that any experience is really above being written about. It's just how it is written about. But I have noticed a lot of people critique things as white savior if the main character or the hero character turns up white. So I wanted to present that to you guys with what you think of that kind of criticism. I don't necessarily see that as something that should really be considered. We know that there are American operations in a variety of ways that try to go into less fortunate countries and then try to rescue victims of things. I just don't think that this book was well written or well paced to make it make sense. And because it's just kind of a deus ex machina all the way at the end, it brings attention to itself to suddenly end things with that resolution. And that's more what the issue is, not the being a white savior. But I did want to pass that to you. For me, I don't think that this book is too inappropriate for school, specifically if it's in a high school. And I don't think it's inappropriate for class. I just don't think that it is the best book on this topic. And I think that you could do something better than this book. But I honestly don't really see the issue. And it feels either mistargeted, like the challenges were not entirely honest, or I'd need to know the place that this came from, because I don't think that this book is. This is one of the most tame books from the ALA's list when it comes to sexual content. Finally, I did want to end with the author's own words from an interview where she was asked, what inspired you to tell this story? Now, we already kind of got that from the author's note, but I wanted to add, in the past year or so, the trafficking of children has gotten a good deal of media attention, but nearly 5 years ago, when I had the chance of meeting with a photographer who was working undercover to document the presence of young girls in brothels overseas, I immediately knew that I wanted to do what no one else had done so far, tell the heartbreaking story from the point of view of one of those individual girls. Again, I think that it would have been more helpful, especially with her journalist background, to not fictionalize this and then make it from that character's perspective, because we got such a closed perspective on everything and we didn't really get characterization to make it meaningful. I think it would have been better as a series of interviews with various people and a travel log and her own thoughts and her own research on the culture and the relationships of things. But I almost wonder if that would be too risky in the current climate of talking about different cultures. But those are my thoughts on this book. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. With that said, have a great week and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?